We're watching the people of Hong Kong speak about the things that we value.
An apology falls short of Hong Kong protest demands. It's Wednesday, June 19th. This is VOA Asia. I'm Jim Stevenson in Washington. Join us as well on Facebook at VOA Asia. Also ahead, peace talks continue in Afghanistan. Trump begins a second run for president. The business of tourists and new cars. It's all on today's VOA Asia. Hong Kong's pro-Beijing leader Carrie Lam offered an apology Tuesday for the political crisis and unrest sparked by a proposed law that would allow extraditions to mainland China. But she did not give in to protesters' demands that she leave office over her handling of the controversial bill. Lam told reporters work on the bill was over until it expires in July next year. But she also pledged to stay and finish the remainder of her term. Opposition to the bill has driven repeated mass protests in Hong Kong this month. Organizers said 2 million people turned out Sunday. While the bill would allow for Hong Kong to extradite to a number of jurisdictions on a case-by-case basis where it does not have a long-term agreement, the prospect of extradition to China in particular has alarmed a wide cross-section of Hong Kong society. Many protesters and pro-democracy legislators call it an evil bill or evil law, which they see as an infringement on Hong Kong's autonomy, which was promised to the former British colony until 2047. Meanwhile, the United States voiced new support for the protesters. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus said the demonstrators were engaged in peaceful protests for things which are enshrined into basic law.
We continue to call on the Hong Kong government to address the concerns of their public, to consult with local and international stakeholders who may be affected by this proposed amendment, even though I know it, of course, has been postponed. The Secretary spoke about this a little yesterday on some of the Sunday shows that he was on and said, that we're watching the people of Hong Kong speak about the things that we value.
Hong Kong democracy activist Joshua Wong joined the throngs of protesters calling for Lam's resignation after he was released from prison Monday. Last week, riot police used tear gas, pepper spray, and rubber bullets on primarily youthful protesters who had surrounded the legislature and were attempting to occupy major roads in a similar manner to the 2014 Umbrella Movement democracy protesters. Hong Kong authorities may have stepped away from the controversial extradition bill, but as VOA's Bill Gallo reports, there's still widespread concern about Hong Kong's future.
An estimated 2 million people attended the latest protest against the government's extradition proposal. That's over a quarter of Hong Kong's population, a forceful repudiation of China's judicial system. Though the government paused the bill, Hong Kong's future remains uncertain. As Beijing closes in, many feel they have no choice but to consider leaving.
It is happening. It is already happening. People of my age, like in their late 30s, 40s, are already planning and they are already looking around.
Maybe somewhere Western, more democratic.
Yeah, I will feel ashamed that I will not like to live in here anymore.
We will go to Taiwan or Australia, somewhere that not yet controlled by China.
Hong Kong's reputation as an international financial hub could also be at risk.
One of the reasons why people like using Hong Kong as an Asia base is that on the one hand they can get access to the China market, but on the other hand it's a separate legal system with greater protections for the rule of law and greater protections for private property and the like. If you open any hole to allow the Chinese legal system to creep in, that would obviously have an implication.
Though there's been no rush for the exits, the business community's concern about the extradition law was genuine.
The American Chamber of Commerce, the British Chamber of Commerce, the European Chamber of Commerce, all have expressed considerable concern about this. So from the business community immediately recognized that this was it was completely contrary to one country, two systems principle.
Since Hong Kong lacks fully democratic institutions, one of the only ways people here can push back is through protest. And at this point, the protests only keep getting bigger. Bill Gallo, VOA News, Hong Kong.
These are among some of the top Asia stories that you'll find right now when you visit voanews.com online. U.S. and China to resume trade talks ahead of Trump-Xi meeting. Expert says United Nations failed before Rohingya crackdown in Myanmar. Strong quake jolts northwest Japan, no major damage reported. Expanded coverage of all these stories and, of course, much more can be found on Facebook at VOA Asia, also at our voanews.com website. VOA Asia continues. I'm Jim Stevenson in Washington. The Taliban says the United States has promised during negotiations to withdraw all troops from Afghanistan. The announcement comes as a crucial round of peace talks between the two adversaries in the 17-year-old Afghan war is expected to take place in Qatar in the next few days. There was no immediate U.S. reaction to the insurgent assertions. The nearly year-long U.S.-Taliban dialogue process has been under fire, and skepticism for not making any headway toward ending the conflict. The criticism has prompted Suhail Shaheen, who speaks for the negotiating team of the insurgent group, to defend the peace process, saying the U.S. side has accepted a key Taliban demand. U.S. Chief Negotiator Salameh Khalilzad has acknowledged discussions with insurgent envoys have focused on troop withdrawal and Taliban's counterterrorism assurances. But the Afghan-born American Reconciliation Ambassador has repeatedly stressed a final agreement would have to cover an insurgent ceasefire and the Taliban's participation in an intra-Afghan dialogue for sustainable peace in the country. The Taliban, however, wants all foreign troops to leave the country before it engages in an intra-Afghan peace talks to discuss the ceasefire and a future political governance system in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, a top official in Afghanistan said Tuesday that at least 50 people die every day fighting terrorist forces in his country, underscoring the intensification in the 17-year-old Afghan conflict. The Afghan National Security Advisor, Hamdullah Mohib, while addressing an international security conference in Russia, called for a coordinated joint action to tackle the menace of terrorism. Afghan security forces, together with American partners, have been battling Taliban insurgents and terrorists linked to Islamic State, which is trying to expand its influence in the turmoil-hit country. Our thanks to Ayaz Gul in Islamabad for contributing this report. President Donald Trump is officially launching his re-election campaign in the key battleground state of Florida. Trump is hoping that voters will reward him at the polls next year for the strong U.S. economy. But heading into the 2020 race, various polls show that Trump remains unpopular with a large swath of voters, often a danger sign for an incumbent president. We have more from VOA national correspondent Jim Malone.
Trump officially launches his re-election bid Tuesday in Florida and appears eager to take on whomever emerges from a crowded field of Democratic presidential contenders. At the moment, former Vice President Joe Biden is the Democratic frontrunner with a sharp focus on criticizing Trump.
He's a threat, in my view, a threat to our core values. 4 years of Donald Trump will be viewed as an aberration in American history. 8 years will fundamentally change who we are as a nation and how we're viewed around the world.
Recent national and state polls have given Biden and several other Democrats an advantage in theoretical head-to-head matchups with the president. Trump also dismissed his own internal polling that showed him trailing Biden and some of the other Democrats in key states, often by wide margins. Presidential polls this early can be unreliable, according to ABC News contributor Matt Dowd.
As we saw in 2016's polls and the race can change suddenly. I think the president would be behooved to admit reality and to say he's behind and he hasn't been reaching out enough. But Democrats would also it's important for Democrats to understand polls can change suddenly, polls can change, and they don't often indicate where the American public is.
Despite the strong economy, Trump's approval rating is weak by historical standards, and it has remained consistently low for most of his presidency, says Larry Sabato.
If we simply restrict ourselves to public polls, then you could really say nothing's changed. Donald Trump has been in the upper 30s, low to mid 40s in virtually every survey during his entire presidency.
The polling suggests that while Trump has largely kept his political base happy, he will need to find a way to broaden his support if he wants to bolster his chances for 2020. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
Coming up, tourists can be a benefit and a bane. You're listening to VOA Asia. This news from VOA Asia. Chinese officials said Tuesday the death toll from 2 strong earthquakes in the country's southwestern Sichuan province had risen to at least 12 people. The earthquakes hit late Monday, injuring another 125 and trapping several others in the rubble. Visit VOA Asia Facebook each day for top stories and great features. This is VOA Asia. As VOA Asia continues, tourism brings benefits and unexpected consequences to local economies, and a new car rolls into production. These are the topics of today's VOA's Asia Business Scene with Skylar Ogden.
The number of tourists visiting Vietnam continues to grow. In 2018 alone, the number of visitors was up by almost 2.7 million compared to the year before. German expat Nia Clate from Exo Travel says that international publicity and easier access has helped to boost the numbers.
Vietnam has been promoted much more in international media recently. It's easier to travel here. There's visa exemptions for a lot of countries. There's more and more flights, international flights arriving in lots of more destinations in Vietnam. So we have flights to Hanoi, Da Nang, Hue, Saigon. So it's much easier to travel.
The numbers of international tourists visiting Vietnam has tripled in a decade, up from 5 million in 2010 to 15.5 million in 2018. The number of travelers from China and South Korea in particular are growing. With the influx of tourists has come a struggle to control environmental degradation. Pat Nguyen is the founder of Che Nat.
When tourism develops like this, it brings many benefits to the local economy, including jobs and infrastructure development. However, there are also a few downsides, such as environmental issues. For example, when the tourists come, some of them litter, which affects the sea and the natural environment. Also, when tourists come, prices go up, which affects many local people's living standards.
Tourism is expected to rise in 2019 as Vietnam's economy continues to grow. VinFast debuted its first vehicle this week. The automaker is a subsidiary of Vietnam's largest private conglomerate, Vingroup, and has 6 automated factories in the northern city of Haiphong. Nguyen Viet Cong is the deputy chairman and director general of Vingroup.
In less than 72 hours, the first Vietnamese branded cars will officially be driven on the streets of Vietnam.
The first VinFast car is a hatchback named Fadil, which is priced at approximately $16,900. The company says it also plans to produce a sedan, a sport utility vehicle, and an electric motorbike. Skeptics say the Vietnamese prefer foreign brands and that it will take people a long time to trust a local brand. The Prime Minister reinforced the importance of strengthening VinFast's brand identity. VinFast says its initial goal is to produce 250,000 of the Fadil model per year. For VOA's Business Scene, I'm Skylar Ogden.
You've been listening to VOA Asia. You'll find us on iTunes and SoundCloud, of course on VOA Asia Facebook, and our website. That's voanews.com. You'll find us on the radio. CCU Radio at National Chung Cheng University in Taipei, Taiwan carries our program. We thank everyone there who's tuned in today. And, of course, we thank our director, Tracy Carter, engineer Cedric Franklin, our managing editor, Diane Gao, and our VOA Asia team, Skylar Ogden, Ira Melman, Keith Lane, and Anna Cook. I'm Jim Stevenson. We're in Washington. We hope you have a terrific day ahead.